We're live, and howdy, folks. We're live. I'm starting a couple minutes early just to get the technical aspects sorted out, and I'm trying a different. I'm trying a little experiment here where I'm also doing. Uh, I've also got Instagram going, which I see is blocking my taskbar, which is bad. So let me just okay there. So yeah, if I pick up anybody on Instagram, we'll just see how that goes. Um, but I figure I might as well uh, piggyback along Instagram while I'm doing YouTube. So hello everybody. I'm going to give everyone a couple of minutes to sign in. Somebody please tell me that my audio is working. Is my audio working? Okay, so we got Sheila, we got Spins and Needles. Thank you. Little Miss TJ Baja from Long Beach. Okay, audio's working good. I ran into some problems early on where the computer thought I had a microphone that I really didn't have. So this is great. This is the week monthly. Ask me anything on the Black Dahlia case, and I'll give folks just a couple more minutes. It's warm in Los Angeles. It's a little sultry, so I have abandoned my flannel for August. I have a very nice Hawaiian shirt that was a gift from somebody. And, oh, my phone just went dark. Sorry, Instagram. I don't know what. Why did the phone go dark? Well, okay. Live. I don't know. Checking connection. Okay. Oh, I'm now live on. Okay. I am also live on Instagram. Again, I've never done Instagram before. Ashley, welcome. Eugene, thank you for showing up. I've got some of your questions. Again, a couple more minutes here for people to show up. Oh, yes, Boxy, we have guests. Yes, we do. We have guests. And there's Allie. Great. So let's see. One more minute. Yeah, I am on Instagram. I have my phone down in the corner. So just for the heck of it, just to see how it works. If it doesn't work, oh well. Let's see. Oh, Instagram is telling me I'm on Instagram at LA Daily Mirror, LA underscore Daily Mirror. Okay, we're coming up on 10 o'clock, and this is great. Lots of folks. Good. I imagine this will go about an hour. I think after an hour, everybody's had enough. So I'll go for maybe an hour, maybe a little over that, and that'll be plenty. 9:59. So close to 10. 10 o'clock. Okay, now I can start. Boxy, ready? Okay. I'm Larry Harnisch, and this is Boxy. Boxy is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. Aren't you, Boxy? Boxy is the pretty much complete, because you don't really get the complete District Attorney's files when you get them on CD. Anyway, I do an Ask Me Anything on the first Tuesday of the month at 10 o'clock Pacific time. The reason I started doing that is because I am increasingly unhappy with the true crime shows, true crime podcasts, anything to do with the Black Dahlia case. I'm much happier doing my own, I have control of my own words. So that's what I'm doing. Steve Hodel, people, welcome. Stick around. You might learn something. P.U. Eatwell, stick around. You might learn something. John Gilmore, folks, just take Severed and throw it away. Just get rid of it. Just no. Okay, so what's in the works? Just what is in the works with the Black Dahlia case? I got 3 different requests for an interview from a show called Mysteries Decoded. I told them no. Oh, Helen, welcome. They asked again. I said no. And finally, one of the producers said, "Hi, we're going to shoot in late July. Of course, it's August." I said no, and I outlined my reasons why, which are many. I'm not really happy with the true crime industry as it exists today. But also, there's a writer's strike going on here in Los Angeles. Well, it's everywhere, but it's very big here in LA. And I am not in the Writers Guild, but I really didn't feel comfortable doing something. So that is going on. There is a TV show in the works called Mysteries Decoded. Now, I got an email last week from a guy named William Mann. And if that name doesn't mean anything to you, he has written some books about Hollywood scandals. He did a book about the murder of William Desmond Taylor called Tinseltown that is being turned into, I don't know, a TV show or a miniseries or something like that. And he says, "Hi, I have been requested by HarperCollins to do a book on the Black Dahlia case. Would you talk to me?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, okay, I have already the FBI file, the DA's files, and the LAPD file. So let me run down those three files so that you will know." Just very quickly. Okay, FBI file. Now that sounds great. Oh, the FBI. Okay. Black Dahlia case, the murder of Elizabeth Short was not an FBI case. Okay. So what is in there is there are some news clippings. There is a lot of behind the scenes stuff about, well, we're going to talk to this paper because the FBI was very conscious of its image. And so it said, well, okay, which paper is friendly to the Bureau? And they were mainly interested in that and which one was going to make them look good because the FBI was all about looking good. In reality, the FBI ran a few tests on some items from the crime scene. Some bristles were recovered from Elizabeth Short's body. They were analyzed. And of course, the LAPD ran her the FBI ran her fingerprints. They did that. But there is lots of bad information in there. Example is there's an interview with a guy named Peter Vetcher. And Peter Vetcher claimed to have had a one-night stand with Elizabeth Short and at the Hotel Figueroa in downtown LA. And it turns out that no, Peter Vetcher was a compulsive liar. And I spent a long time researching the life of Peter Vetcher, and the guy was just full of it. But that did not stop a French artist, a French graphic novel has been written based on his account because it's in the FBI file. Okay. So the average person who doesn't know anything about the Black Dahlia case and relies on the FBI files, you're going to get lost. Okay. Second, Boxy, we're going to talk about you. Okay, very quickly. The DA's files are from the grand jury investigation. And there was a grand jury investigation because of the Leslie Dillon debacle, which I'm not going to get into. Just trust me, it was a huge, huge mess. It was such a mess that the grand jury investigated the case. Okay. And so there is some useful information in there, but generally it's about the Leslie Dillon debacle. And there is a lot of information. Lady Tyler, November Bat, Zeppelin, greetings. Helen, greetings. Anyway, there's a lot of unrelated stuff in there. There are a few useful items in there. There are the George Hodel transcripts, but it's not as useful as you might think because so much of it is devoted to Leslie Dillon, which did not stop P.U. Eatwell from turning it into a big conspiracy, which it's not. If you read everything that's in there, you'll see now Leslie Dillon was in San Francisco, and that's that. Okay, so that leaves the LAPD file. And I told Mr. Mann, I said, okay, look, the LAPD is really guarded with its Black Dahlia material. If Joan Renner were here, she would tell you that, because Joan worked on it. The police museum in Highland Park did a little exhibit on Elizabeth Short and the Black Dahlia case. And of course, it was James Elroy Presents, because James Elroy has to get his mitts all over everything. James Elroy Presents Elizabeth. And so there were a few very carefully curated items from the LAPD files in those display cases. Most of it, the bulk of what was in there was already out, was already published in the newspapers. There were a few things that weren't published, but they were really unhelpful. There was all of the Woody Guthrie stuff because nobody cares about Woody Guthrie. He didn't kill Elizabeth Short. So that's just kind of a sort of a, geeky side note. There were a couple of pages of reports of addresses where cops had door knocked. And it's useful mainly to show, well, okay, they went to this neighborhood. And if you're not familiar with the Black Dahlia crime scene, it's on the east side of Crenshaw. Well, they went over to the west side of Crenshaw and went by every house. And so you'll see that. There was one kind of interesting report where there were a couple of guys from Idaho who took a little vacation in Long Beach, and they met Elizabeth Short, and they took some snapshots of her. And those snapshots are plastered all over the internet. There's one of her, and I've discussed this before, there's one of her at Grauman's, the forecourt of Grauman's Chinese Theater. There's one at Earl Carroll's, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's out there. But really, and I told William Mann, I said, okay, look, Steve Hodel has goofed it up for everybody. Nobody is going to get into the LAPD files as long as Steve Hodel is alive. And I say this again and again, Steve Hodel is a pariah within the LAPD. Steve gets very upset about when I say that, but nonetheless, no. Okay, Femke, why are the LAPD files so carefully guarded? Because it's an open case. It's not an active case, but it's an open case. And because the LAPD feels no need to have anybody get into that stuff. And I kind of am in favor of that in the sense that Black Dahlia stuff walks off. Anytime there is Black Dahlia material, it will walk away. And that's why I'm glad, Boxy, I'm talking about you now. That's why I'm glad that the DA no longer lets people paw through the box of files because stuff walks away. And so what you get now from the DA is you get some of the files that are redacted on CD-ROM, and that's it. Okay, why doesn't Elroy talk about the Black Dahlia case anymore? Well, James Elroy got burned on the Black Dahlia case by jumping in bed with Steve Hodel. And so now he just doesn't discuss it at all. That's the short answer. Okay, so that's William Mann, and that's a quick recap. Now, I always do a book update. The book word count is right now, as of last week, 124,000 words. And, some people have the notion, well, Larry Harnisch has writer's block or whatnot, or Larry Harnisch has abandoned the book. No, you don't get 124,000 words by playing computer solitaire. What I'm working on right now, I'm in the last month of Elizabeth Short's life. I am looking at her being down in San Diego. If you know about the life of Elizabeth Short, around Christmas time, just before Christmas, she went down to San Diego in December of '46. And she was there about a month and then came back to LA and disappeared. And yes, she did disappear and nobody knew where she went. Anyway, so I need to fill in some blanks in terms of what was going on with homeless or unhoused women, however you want to phrase that, in San Diego. And let me tell you, San Diego was not welcoming. If you were a woman, if you were a young woman and you showed up in San Diego without a job, without money, without a place to stay, you were unwelcome. And if they discriminated, they weeded out. It's like, okay, if they were good girls from decent families, they might get help finding a job. But there was a tremendous housing crisis in San Diego after World War II. I mean, it is stunning. It was very hard to find a place to live. And so the general treatment of women in San Diego who were homeless or who showed up without money or a job or place to stay, they got sent home almost immediately. And there was sort of they would divide them. Okay, the sort of good girls, what have you, are, they might get, there was a little bitty shelter, maybe we'll say 25 beds, something like that. And that's it. You showed up in San Diego, whatnot, you could get arrested for vagrancy and either sent home immediately, or if they thought the women were up to no good, they would get several months in jail for vagrancy, and they would get segregated in the jail until they tested negative for VD. So I mean, San Diego, yeah, that really happened, and San Diego really wanted the message to get out there that ladies who were unattached or whatever, or sometimes women would show up and, you know, their boyfriend or their sweetheart was in the Navy and he got shipped off out to sea. They weren't welcome. You know, it's like, go back home. And yes, spins the needle. Yes. The YWCA had it was a very small program. It was not a lot, but they did do something. There was an outfit called the Big Sisters that that also helped women in that situation. But again, if women, you know, if women had job skills, and job skills would be, you know, secretarial skills or whatnot, they might get help getting a job. But if you were just hanging out at an all-night movie theater, and all-night movie theaters were a thing in San Diego, they were well known as a place. If you didn't have a place to spend the night, you could sleep in an all-night movie theater. There were about half a dozen of them going at the time. And it was just, yeah, that was a place to spend the night if you had nowhere else. And there, as I said, there are about half a dozen of them. So that's kind of what I've been doing. So before we, and I'm getting a lot of great questions here, but I want to do, these are two questions that keep coming up over and over again, over and over again. So I want to, yeah. Lady Tyler, the Five is a great book. I cannot recommend it enough. Hallie Rubenhall did a great job. The Five is excellent. Anyway, I keep getting two questions over and over again. One of them is about Carl Balsiger, and the other one was, what about alleged corruption within the LAPD? Okay, so first of all, Carl Balsiger, who is he, and why are we talking about him? Well, okay, who was Carl Balsiger? Carl Balsiger encountered Elizabeth Short not long before she left for San Diego. And his story to the police was, yeah, I met Elizabeth Short. I felt sorry for her. I took her on a business trip to Camarillo. We stayed in Camarillo one night, came back the next day with a business partner. And then, let's see, he put her up overnight at a place in Hollywood. And then the next day, he gave her a ride to the bus station in Hollywood, on Cahuenga in Hollywood. And that is it. Now, I have every reason to believe that what he said was true. It was a business trip to Camarillo. He did have business interests there. He did have a business partner. His business partner did accompany them back from Camarillo to Los Angeles. Okay. So it sounds legit. All right, fine. So why are we talking about Carl Balsiger? Why is he a suspect? And that has to do, Boxy, with you. Okay. Frank Jimison sort of led the district attorney's investigation into the Black Dahlia case. And the way grand juries work is they're appointed for a year and then they finish up. And one grand jury wrapped up and it was handed off to the next grand jury with the idea that the next grand jury would keep working on the Black Dahlia case. And Frank Jimison was told, is, you know, look, Frank, the grand jury is going to want updates, occasional updates on the Black Dahlia investigation. So every so often you will go in and testify to them. Okay, fine. That didn't happen. The incoming grand jury had zero interest in the Black Dahlia case. It's like it was a big yawn. They didn't care. And so Jemison finally said, okay, well, I guess everybody's done with the Black Dahlia case. I'm going to write up a final menu and say case closed. And that's what happened. So There is a final memo from Frank Jimison, and this is where we get to Carl Balsiger. Frank Jimison writes this memo, and he lists everybody that he considered a suspect. And that was the basis of this Wikipedia article, which has been just distorted and all mangled. But it started out as a Frank Jimison memo. Every suspect was numbered, okay? And it would be Red Manley. It would be Mark Hansen. It would be George Hodel, and on and on. It would be Madam Chang. It would be queer women surgeon. And, sorry, but that's the length, Boxy. You have some non-PC language in there. Anyway, so there's this memo from Frank Jimison. And one of the people on that list is Carl Balsiger. Okay, why? Well, Carl Balsiger was in, hey, Corpus Fusion, welcome. Okay, Carl Balsiger was at Camp Cook when Elizabeth Short was at Camp Cook. Okay, and so Frank Jimison says, well, obviously they knew each other. And it's like, no, okay, how can we be sure of that? Well, the population of Camp Cook, which is now Vandenberg Air Force Base, the population of Camp Cook at that time in 1943 was 30,000 people. It was the biggest buildup of the camp. And so to assume that everybody knew everybody else out of these 30,000 people is like, no. So good old Frank Jimison decided that they knew each other. And there's a little bit more. There was this rumor that nobody could ever nail down. And you'll read it in Severed, that there was this violent, abusive sergeant, Sergeant Chuck. And there's this interview, and they looked all over for Sergeant Chuck, because the story was that he was abusive to Elizabeth Short. They lived together as man and wife. And she got him court-martialed and sent overseas. But nobody could ever find this guy. The LAPD could never find him. Jemison could never find him. Nobody could ever find this guy. And so Frank Jimison, in his wisdom, decided that Carl Balsiger was really Sergeant Chuck. Well, no. So he already, you have to question some of the things that Frank Jimison said. Anyway, so Frank Jimison takes Sergeant Chuck and he mushes him into Carl Balsiger. Okay. More than that, there was a killing, and this is where people get into it. There was a killing in 1941 in Balsiger's hometown of a woman named Lila Adele Welsh. And, to give Frank Jimison the benefit of the doubt, the average person, researcher today, has access to stuff that Jemison didn't have. So I can get Balsiger's service records. I can tell you, well, Balsiger wasn't anywhere around in 1941. He was in the service. He was in the military. He was gone. But and the internet sleuths will say, oh yeah, this killing was just like the Black Dahlia. Well, no, it wasn't. And I'm not going to get into that case. It's just like, no, it wasn't. So it's really because of all of that. The Jemison memo, sorry, Boxy, that Carl Balsiger continues to interest people. The reality is he had a very brief encounter with Elizabeth Short, and like everybody else said, I never saw her again. That is the typical last line. Never saw her again. He was in the service in 1941 when this woman was killed. So that's kind of, that eliminates him. But of course, he's all over the internet. So that's kind of that. Now, the other question that keeps coming up repeatedly is LAPD corruption in the 1930s and the 1940s. And show and tell time, we have this book and we have this book, okay? This is thicker than Thieves. Don't read this book. It will make your head explode and you will have to unlearn everything. This book is harder to find. Don't read it either. You'll just have to unlearn everything. This book is where the story about the Guys in the Mercedes. Okay, you know the story about the guys in the Mercedes? That's in here. Okay. These are both self-published books by disgruntled ex-employees. And as a rule of thumb, you should avoid self-published books by disgruntled ex-employees. But let's talk about the LAPD and LAPD corruption. Okay. Yeah, it's Jack Webb's The Badge is propaganda. And the main thing about the badge is Jack Webb adopts this downbeat, hard-boiled attitude about all the victims. But I'm not going to get into that now. Anyway, now for our purposes, the history of the LAPD starts in 1938. Why 1938? Okay, that was when there was a big recall. The mayor was a guy named Frank Shaw. His brother Joe Shaw was also involved in city government. And I won't get into why there was a recall. It was for good reason. And so there was a huge turnover in Los Angeles city government in 1938, including the police chief. There was a new police chief came in. I would call him, and you have to be careful of the word reform, but I would say he was a reform police chief. His name was Arthur Homan, and he came in the late 30s as police chief. Now understand, in the city of LA, a couple things. First of all, the police chief is not elected, okay? He is also not appointed by the mayor. The police chief in Los Angeles serves at the pleasure of the police commission, which is a 5-member board, okay? So the mayor cannot just fire the police chief. That doesn't happen. The other thing, and it's really, really, really important to emphasize, the people who don't live in Los Angeles have a very hard time with the municipal structure of LA. They will say, "Oh well, it's so many suburbs in search of a city." It's like, no, it's not. There are multiple jurisdictions. There are multiple police agencies. People think, and even a certain Washington Post reporter will assume that Beverly Hills is part of LA. No, it's not. All of these cities are separate. They have separate police departments, and overall, everything is the Los Angeles County. That's the sheriff's department. You have the LAPD, fine. You have Glendale, that's got its own police department. Burbank has its own police department. Santa Monica has its own police department. Beverly Hills has its own police department. Okay. Where was Bugsy Siegel killed? Beverly Hills. Okay, that's a Beverly Hills case. It's not an LAPD case. And you will see people refer to it as an LAPD case. No, Beverly Hills. And there's also stuff going on in LA County. So there are all these interlocking jurisdictions. So it isn't easy. You can't just say, oh, well, the LAPD. Okay. So the history of the LAPD starts in 38. You get a new police chief, Arthur Homan. Fine. One of his more lasting moves is a new badge. In the 1930s, they used to hand out badges to everybody. They're now called juice badges. The current design of the LAPD badge was implemented about 1940, we'll say. It was an Arthur Homan thing. And the LAPD is extremely protective of that image, of that badge. You will see very good knockoffs, but if you really know the badge, you can tell, no, that's not a real badge. That's a fake that you bought on eBay. So that's kind of that. Now, the other thing that's really important is when you talk about corruption. Okay, how are you going to define corruption? It's like, well, let's say, well, the police are bad. Well, okay, can you be a little more specific than saying the police were bad? How were they corrupt? And is it like fixing traffic tickets? Do you buy your way out of a traffic ticket? Is it that kind of corruption? Is it let's say looking the other way at gambling? Is it covering up murder? Okay, so is it more to the police brutality? So there are a lot of ways. So I think it's more important. I think it's important to define what you mean exactly by police corruption. And the short answer is, was the LAPD covering up murders? Hell no, they weren't. Absolutely not. It was just the opposite. And the other thing is the structure of the LAPD. You have to understand, and if you read the Harry Bosch novels, if you read the Michael Conley novels, you'll get some of that where the LAPD is divided up into geographic jurisdictions. Okay, you have Hollywood with the Black Dahlia case. You have the Hollywood division. Okay, she lived in Hollywood for a while, so the Hollywood division and the Hollywood detectives got involved. The body was found in what was then University Division. Okay, those detectives and those officers got involved. It was such a big case that it was handed off to homicide. So you got those guys involved. Okay, so you have all these different jurisdictions. And the other thing about the LAPD, it is by nature a very insular. Um, I, I don't like the word silo, but it is a very insular culture. Okay, even within the LAPD, there isn't necessarily a lot of communication between what homicide is working on and what some other, it's just by the nature of LA being so spread out. Um, and certainly interagency communication is not really, doesn't happen a lot. The sheriff's department and the LAPD might not necessarily know what each other's working on. So here you have Thicker and Thieves. Okay, what happened? Arthur Homan steps down as police chief and is replaced by a guy named Clements C.B. Horrell, who is the World War II police chief. He's an old vice cop. C.B. Horrell was involved in, if you're familiar with it, in the Depression, the bum blockades. Okay, what were the bum blockades? The LAPD would have officers out on the border coming into California, and if you didn't look like you had money or a job or something like that, they would turn you away. It was called the bum blockades. Yes, it was a thing. It did exist, and Clemens Horrell was involved in that. So yeah, so he was to give him, to be fair, World War II happened on his watch, and the department lost something on the order of 500 guys went into the service. And when your department is loses that many people, you've got to replace them with somebody. And so they replaced all the men that went into the service with war emergency officers. And if you look at their serial numbers, you will see that their number as WE, which means war emergency. And so the LAPD was contending with that. Now, which brings us to Charles Stoker, who wrote this book and gave them out. This was $2 at a thrift store. Now, the original version is very collectible. Steve Hodel has reissued the book, and I have no idea what the sales are. He seems to think, he has made a lot out of what in it, because, of course, his dad is always a suspect in every evil thing that ever happened. Okay. It involves Brenda Allen. Okay. Who is Brenda Allen? Brenda Allen is the Hollywood Madam, and she advertised in the Academy Players Directory and that kind of thing. Okay. She's investigated. She had, for lack of a better, she had a relationship with Charles Stoker, who was this vice cop. Okay. She eventually got arrested, and please note, Scotty Bowers fans, she went to jail rather than name names, which is always, it's like, honest to goodness sex workers, they generally don't name names, unlike Scotty Bowers, which should tell you something about Scotty Bowers. Anyway, she went to jail rather than name names. And okay, fine. Stoker's a cop. She's a Hollywood madam. All right. Here's the thing. Did Brenda Allen kill anybody? No, she was a Hollywood madam. Was she suspected of killing anybody? No. Was she investigated by the homicide division? No. Then F off, No. The idea that the cops were covering up murders is just laughable. If anything, you will find with certain police departments that there were allegations of brutality, not like let's say Chicago, when the the first guy to be detained in the murder of Suzanne Degnan, who was this little girl who was killed the year before. They took the janitor and they tied him up in a really uncomfortable position to get him to confess. And he later brought a police brutality suit against the Chicago Police Department. So if anything, the homicide, the cops, generally speaking, tended to be a little rough. The other thing that the LAPD would do, and this was not the homicide division, but this was within the department, this was the department culture. They would have a couple of detectives stationed at Union. They would have them at Union Station. And if some undesirable, mobster showed up, next train out of town, you're not wanted. That really did happen. That did happen. Yes, they did that. They also did it at the airport later on. If a known mobster showed up at the airport, next plane out of town. The LAPD really did that. Yeah. So, yeah. Now, you have to ask yourself, and I'm going to go to the live questions in a minute here. You have to ask yourself, who is pushing the narrative that the police were inept or the police were corrupt? Okay. The people who are generally pushing that are the folks who have a solution. They want to say, well, the police knew who it was and they let my dad get away with it because he knew too much. That would be Steve Hodel. And the reality is no. And somebody asked somewhere about the attitude of the investigators toward Elizabeth Short. And that really brings us to the dichotomy, the difference between Frank Jimison and the lead detectives in the Black Dahlia case, Harry Hansen and Finus Brown. I had and I would say this is generally true of the homicide detectives that I've interviewed. They don't care. The attitude that was expressed to me is, you may not like your victim, but you don't get to pick them. And you have to walk in their shoes until you understand them. With Frank Jimison, it's a whole different ballgame. He openly disliked Elizabeth Short. He disliked her for making trouble for Frank Jimison and making his life complicated. So in his summaries on the Black Dahlia case, it's real clear that he didn't like her. But in terms of the actual guys who were investigating the case, the LAPD detectives, yeah, they had respect for the victim. And regardless of what Steve Hodel will tell you, no, the Black Dahlia investigation was never taken away from robbery. I'm sorry, I keep calling robbery and homicide were separate divisions then. It wasn't RHD. The Black Dahlia case was never taken away from homicide and given to the district attorney. That did not happen. That is a Steve Hodel fantasy. And I think that is all I am going to say for now about those two perennial questions. Let me go to the live question. I'm going to alternate between live questions and the submitted questions here. Let's see. Why are the LAPD files so carefully guarded after 76 years? Because it's the LAPD and they can. They have no interest in clearing up anything. As I said, I would rather that the LAPD covered up. Why doesn't Elroy talk about the Black Dahlia case anymore? Because he got burned. Elroy was a big supporter of me. Then he decided, first of all, he thought Steve Hodel was full of it because Steve wrote that his dad killed Geneva Elroy. And Elroy's attitude was, F you, Steve Hodel. Well, when the paperback came out, then James decided, I think I'll get some publicity off of that and I'll give Steve Hodel a boost. So he wrote the introduction. So now he doesn't talk about it at all, which is probably best for him. Somebody asked me, am I on speaking terms with James Elroy? I have nothing to say to James Elroy. His books are unreadable. He's gotten increasingly weird. I don't understand people who, I don't know how anybody can get through his books. So, okay. So let me go then to a submitted question. Someone told me that film director David Lynch was shown a photo. Yeah, that's the David Lynch BS. David Lynch claims to have seen. He says John St. John showed him this photo that was like a nighttime photo at the crime scene. And I've answered, I kind of dealt with this question before. Given the limitations of photographic technology in 1947, that is virtually impossible. More important than that, the LAPD is a very closed society. The detectives are very skilled in not saying anything. The idea that being a Hollywood director, that might get you a free meal someplace, but in terms of what the LAPD thinks is like, so what? They don't care. I mean, it means if you're a big Hollywood director, that means almost nothing to them. The attitude, and you really have to understand the mentality of the LAPD and the view of, especially now, because that's one thing I should have mentioned is the style of policing has changed tremendously since 9/11. Okay, what used to be practiced in law enforcement is, since 9/11, it's a totally different ballgame. And this person also asked, I read that movies were taken of the crime scene. No, not to my knowledge. And if you look at all the images of the crime scene, you will not see a single movie camera. So I would say absolutely not. Okay. Let's see. Has the family of Walter Bailey or Leslie Dillon ever spoke out about being Dahlia suspect? No. I'm not sure Leslie Dillon died years ago. And I don't know if I forget. I don't think Leslie Dillon had any kids. I don't think the Bailey family, any members of the Bailey family, have gone on the record one way or the other. I did talk to them. I haven't talked to them in a long, long time. I don't really have anything new to say to them. But no, the short answer is no. Okay, so let me go back to one of the, let's see. Beth Short was a compulsive liar. Do you think any of her compulsive lying might have contributed to her death? Yeah, we don't know what. Elizabeth Short had a lot of sympathy stories. And you can tell by going through, because the police and the newspapers interviewed everyone who crossed paths with Elizabeth Short. And they would tell you, well, she said this. She would tell people, okay, she would tell people that she had been married to a flyer. They had a son who died. She would tell people she was engaged to a man in the service who was hospitalized, and she was hoping that they would get out in time to be married. Okay, none of that's true. So yeah, was she a compulsive liar? Yeah, maybe it did. I mean, we know what she used to say, but without knowing her interaction with the killer, we don't know. I've got a question here on Instagram, which is chances that Robert Red Manley killed Elizabeth Short or was involved. 0. That is okay. What are the chances that Red Manley killed her? Absolutely none. Okay, none. Red Manley sort of wanted to befriend Elizabeth Short. He also wanted to be friends with her, but I think he pretty much had it with her. When he dropped her off at the Biltmore, he was done with her, and he had a complete alibi for where he was at the time she was killed. So the possibility that Red Manley did it, absolutely not. Okay, let's see here. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll down here. Marge Dyer, Miss Little TJ Baja, Marge Dyer. Yes, I don't know. That's a great question. I have never had any look. I have spent a lot of time looking for Marge Dyer, and I have not had a lot of success. Um, you know, um, Margie Graham, who was the friend from Massachusetts who was also living with Elizabeth Short out here in California. She said she went through people fast, but she made friends easily. And she did. I mean, Elizabeth Short really went through a lot of friends. And Who Marge Dyer was, I don't know. I have never, she's one of there are two people I've never been able to find, Marge Dyer and Lynn Martin. And I have spent gobs and gobs of time looking for Lynn Martin. No idea. There is, and I will warn you now, there are people on Ancestry.com who think they have found Lynn Martin. It's the wrong Lynn Martin. You know, so be very careful with amateur genealogists. Very, very careful with that. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let me go back to a submitted question here. Um, Seems like the Baileys moved to Norton Avenue well before Elizabeth Short's death. Um, a couple of years. A couple of years. They had the Baileys had a great big house in a very nice. And I'm trying to remember if it's View Park. I think it's called View Park. I can't remember. But they had a much bigger, nicer house, and they downsized, and that's why they moved to Norton Avenue. They had a much bigger house. And was I ever able to determine the order and dates of Bailey's dismissal from the hospital? No. That's what's interesting about Walter Bailey is he just sort of drifted away into nothing. You know, it's just everything just sort of trailed off very quietly. It's you know, there was no abrupt break. It's just sort of dwindled. He just sort of vanished. He just sort of disappears. It's very weird. Okay, so let me go over to, let's see. Do you think, okay, LA Woman Tours, do you think, sorry about this, do you think blaming police for bad investigations is still a viable tactic? I am thinking OJ, but it seems to happen a lot. Okay. The investigation of the Black Dahlia case was state of the art for 1947. It absolutely was. You look at the way they handled it, it was absolutely by the book. And people will say, "Oh, well, there's the crime scene. There's the crime scene, and there's no tape." Okay, why isn't there any crime scene tape at the Black Dahlia? Okay, they blocked off the whole street. When you look at the crime scene photographs, you will see that the entire street was considered a crime scene. So they blocked off the whole street. So they didn't even before the invention of crime scene tape, they had rope, and you will see some of that. If you watch the movie He Walked by Night, you will see that they had like rope barriers that they used before they had crime scene tape. So that would be my answer there. Let's see here. Okay, Marge Dyer. Okay. Okay, Eugene asked, am I still on speaking terms with James Ellroy? No. But this is an interesting one. Somebody asked about Ralph Asdell. Did you know about Ralph Asdell? Okay, I'm the one who found Ralph Asdell. Okay, I went through the old newspaper clips and I found his name. And I located him and I interviewed him. Until I interviewed Ralph Asdell, no one had ever talked to him. And I'm very honored to say I was one of Ralph's pallbearers. Okay. What do I think of his theory? He certainly thought it was a potential lead. He did what you're supposed to do, was he passed it on to the lead detectives. Hey, I think this and this and this. And it was up to them on whether they wanted to act on it or not. But yeah. So, I mean, Ralph handled it the way Paul DeRiver should have handled it. He should have taken this letter he got from Leslie Dillon and gone to Jack Donahoe, who was head of homicide, or Harry Hansen at Finest Brown, and said, hey, I got a letter from this guy that's kind of hinky. You might want to check it out. No, he doesn't do that. He decides, oh, Leslie Dillon has a split personality, and under this other personality, he killed Elizabeth Short. No. And that was the fiasco. Okay. So let's see here. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Lady Tyler. Yeah. Yeah. The Dahlia stuff on Wikipedia is terrible. It's absolutely awful. Run away. You know. Well, let's see. Oh, I had a VV. Yes. Thank you, Vince. Would I say Elroy's work has done a lot to pop culture believing the LAPD cover-up murders? I think so. I mean, I don't understand how anybody can get through a James Elroy novel. And when I was friends with Elroy, one of the things that really ticked him off was that I hadn't read his books and I wasn't a fan. That that probably helped end the relation, my friendship, such as it was with James Elroy. But you got to remember, I worked at the LA Times. I worked in a building full of writers, many of whom were lots better than James Elroy, you know. But it always bugged him that I hadn't read his books and I wasn't, just this devoted fan, because that's kind of what he expected. Um, so yeah, people believe that, but James' knowledge of people consider James Elroy some sort of expert on LA history and LA government and all that. No, he's terrible. Oh my gosh. If you know anything about LA government and LA history, he's just mangled and mashed everything. It's like, oh my God, that's not how it works. you know, no, this isn't at all how it works. This isn't at all what happened. No, no, he's got it totally wrong. Again, if you don't live in LA, you won't know um, all these different jurisdictions, all these different municipalities. And writers depend on readers' ignorance. That's how Steve Hodel, one of Steve Hodell's techniques. Steve Hodel knows that most people don't have a clue how law enforcement works, that most people don't have a clue how the court system works. Most people don't have a clue how grand juries work. Most people don't have a clue about rules of evidence or courtroom procedure. And so he can say, for example, well, the attorney in this trial said blah, blah. And nobody's going to say, yeah, Steve, you were a cop. You know that what lawyers say in a trial isn't evidence and the jury can't consider that. He won't tell you that. So there is a lot of ignorance about just the nuts and bolts of government. And if I hadn't worked at the LA Times for 27 years, I wouldn't be up to speed on it either. But yeah, James just mangles things unbelievably. Um, I should say, I should say that Steve Hodel has posted on his blog that he is working on Black Dahlia 4, Beyond the Valley of the Black Dahlia Avengers, or Black Dahlia Avenger meets Dracula Jr. I don't know. Anyway, he's working on one. Okay, what have I got over here? Who are my top suspects? Maybe you've already covered this. Looking forward to your book on the subject. Um, yeah, the guy, the person who makes the most sense to me, and we really don't have time to get into Walter Bailey a lot. Um, the difference between Walter Bailey and all the other suspects is, first of all, he had a connection to the neighborhood. He lived there. He lived within a block of the crime scene. Number one. Number two, there was a connection between the Short family and the Bailey family, not through, as far as we know, Walter Bailey directly, but his daughter knew Elizabeth Short's sister. There was a relationship there. I have pictures of them together. So, yeah, there is that. The third thing is, of all the people who have been put forward as possible suspects, Walter Bailey really was a surgeon, unlike George Hodel. Oh, I really want him. Please make him a surgeon, please. No, Walter Bailey really was a surgeon. He is the only person who has been put forward who could actually do what was done to Elizabeth. He could have done that. Okay. The other people, no. He could have done it. Okay, so that's it. Let me see here. Now I want to go back to, I want to get to this question by Fruity Bat. Fruity Bat, I think you're free. I've seen some people say Elizabeth should be exhumed, but is there any point? No, there is not. No. Why do you exhume a body? To determine the cause of death. Okay. We know why Elizabeth Short died. There's no question there. There is absolutely no purpose whatsoever to, get her up out of the ground. You're not going to get it. All you're going to do is cause even more grief to the family. No, don't do that. Okay. Let's see here. Did Maurice Clement drive Elizabeth around town? Maybe. I'm not sure I'm not sure Maurice had a car. He might have had a car. That one of her roommates at the Cherokee place on Cherokee um, said Maurice was her favorite boyfriend. Whether he drove her around or not, who's Maurice? He worked at one of the. I think he worked at one of the studios. he is often described as Maurice the voice teacher. He was not a voice teacher, you know. And like one of the problems in researching the Black Dahlia case is nobody used their real name. Everybody had this other name. They would use another name. It was just it was just constant. And that's one of the problems you run into with Elizabeth Short's address book is nobody used their right name. They gave her a fake name. So did he? Maybe. There's a report in the newspaper that there was a man seen at the crime scene in the 30s and 40s. D. Kagan, I think what you're talking about is, I keep saying, I think it was Walter Sullivan. It was a guy who lived a block away, and he was dropping, he was leaving rose clippings at in that vicinity of the crime scene, and he saw a car and that kind of thing. Probably. I mean, it might be true. Was that individual, and I keep calling him Sullivan. Sullivan was the guy at the who checked the luggage. A different guy, Johnson. I think he saw what he said he saw. Was that the killer? I don't know. He was interviewed by the police. I do know that, and he gave a statement to the papers. Beyond that, I don't know. Let's see. Let me go back here to. Okay, I don't think I have anything else from Instagram. Okay. So let's see here. Did Warren Thorngate ever mention rumors or insinuations among the Bailey family that Walter Bailey was responsible? No, absolutely not. I haven't. Who is Warren Thorngate? Okay, Warren Thorngate is a nephew of Walter Bailey. Very interesting guy. Really interesting guy. Very nice. He was very helpful to me in terms of family history and family photographs and that kind of thing. I haven't talked to him in a long, long time, but when I did talk to him, he was very helpful. But I don't think they had they had any suspicion. I mean, they kind of knew that Walter Bailey was having problems, but beyond that, I don't think there were any specific. They knew other stuff. They knew about Walter Bailey's involvement with his partner, Alexander Partika. They sure knew about that. But in terms of the Black Dahlia case, nah. Okay. Let's see. Stephen K. Has District Attorney Stephen K. ever reversed his opinion that Hodel was the killer? He seemed very enthusiastic. Yeah, you know what? This is another thing that Steve won't tell you. Steve Hodel won't tell you. Stephen K. said, yeah, based on this evidence. Okay. Stephen K. is not a dummy. It's based on this evidence. So that's Steve Hodel's evidence. He's relying on Steve Hodel to be truthful. Is Steve Hodel truthful? No. But Stephen K. is relying on Steve Hodel to be honest. Now, Stephen K. no longer discusses the Black Dahlia case. Stephen K. no longer discusses Steve Hodel. The only thing Stephen K. will say publicly, or has said publicly, is that he doesn't believe there was an LAPD cover-up. He doesn't believe that. He said, I don't believe Steve Hodel's allegations that there was a cover-up. But beyond that, no. So, like a lot of people who got involved with Steve Hodel at some point, they all distance themselves now. Kind of like James Ellroy. They just don't discuss it anymore. Kind of like Steve K. They don't discuss it anymore. You might ask yourself, why is that? Let's see. Helen, did anyone try to trace the call from the killer who sent her things to the newspaper? Okay, thank you for asking, because I have more show and tell, which is this book and this book. Okay, what are these books? This is For the Life of Me by James H. Richardson. Okay, and the story about the phone call is in this book. The other book is Newspaperwoman. It is the memoir of Agnes Sullivan, Aggie Underwood. Okay, so yeah, if you read the account in For the Life of Me, you will see that he hung up before Richardson could trace the call. So there was a call. I have every reason to believe that the guy really did call the Examiner and really did talk to Richardson. but he hung up before um, they could trace the call. And somebody sent me a question about, what was the background noise? And, it's like those would be questions for Jim Richardson. He's long gone. So we don't know that. Um, I think Richardson described it as a soft voice, but that's all. But I would have to read the book again. The other book I'm talking about, I would want to talk about, is Aggie Underwood, Newspaperwoman. And the thing about these, because they both have sections on the Black Dahlia case. Okay, both of these books, both of them, you have to always keep in mind they are memoirs, they are autobiographies. Even in the best of cases, you are going to have somebody writing from their point of view, who tends to, at least in the case of Jim Richardson, he relies on his memory way too much, and he didn't check the clips. Um, so, is what he says accurate? Well, kind of. I mean, the main thing about Richardson's book is the attitude, which is Jim Richardson was a reformed alcoholic, and he writes very openly in For the Life of Me about being an alcoholic, being a drunk, not being able to hold a job, and how nobody would hire him, and nobody would take a chance on him. Okay, the attitude in this book is, okay, I was a better reporter drunk than you were sober, and don't ever forget it. And there is that sense throughout the book. Um, he he is prone to the issues of memory, where memory collapses time. Things take longer, and he pushes them together. You'll say, well, it was on the front page for so many. It's like he didn't check any of that stuff. He just wrote it off the top of his head. So you have to be very careful of that. Um, his account of the phone call, yeah, maybe. With Aggie Underwood, I think Aggie Underwood made a much more diligent effort to be accurate. She told these stories, the stories that are in the book. She told those stories again and again. There are recordings of her out at Cal State Northridge. Her archives are out at Cal State Northridge, and she tells the same stories almost word for word on the tapes and other ones. Somebody asked, "Oh, I didn't know Jack Donahoe bought a gun for Aggie Underwood." Oh yeah, that's on the tapes, or at least they were when I listened to them. I don't know where they are now, but the Aggie Underwood archive is out at Cal State Northridge. She was recorded by Will Fowler, and she argues with Will Fowler because Will was very determined to present himself as the first reporter on the crime scene, and of course he wasn't. And so Aggie Underwood would argue with him. Anyway, okay. Um, let's see. Okay. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to one of these submitted questions here. Um, let's see. Oh, somebody sent me a photograph of Elizabeth Short, blown way up. And he said, okay, she's got a ring on her finger. Is that her engagement ring? I've never heard of her being engaged. I just noticed that. And you know what? I had the same question. I asked that of the family when I was in touch with them. I said, hey, she's wearing this ring in this photograph. And the answer is no. She never got, was she engaged? Yes, she was engaged to Matt Gordon. He got a star sapphire for her when he was over in the CBI, the China, Burma, India theater. He got a big star sapphire for her for an engagement ring. Um, but she never got the ring. But yes, they were engaged. So let's see. That answers that question. Did I see Brian De Palma's Black Dahlia? Yeah, I did. It was terrible. Um, let's see. Um, Lady Tyler Bio Rodriguez. What was Walter Bailey's service record in World War I? You know what? It is really hard to get his service records. I know what he did, but in terms of dealing with that branch of the national records operation, I have tried and tried to get his service record, and it's like they can't find anything. Yeah. So, D. Kagan, was Miss Alexandra Partika, who lived on Lexington, the same one who was with Dr. Bailey? Yes. Let's see here. Are there significant gaps on where she was during those years, say 44 to 47, or have you filled the gaps? She seems to have been on the go a lot, so how can anyone be certain of all the places she roomed? Did she stay at the YWCA? Okay, there is, actually, I'm going to talk about you here. There is, in the district attorney's files, a document called Movements of Elizabeth Short. And that is the best that anybody can get of where she was and what she did. It's not perfect. She did move a lot. She would go back and forth between Boston and Florida, Boston and Florida. Came out to California for a while, went back, and whatnot. So she did move a lot, but I think, let's see. After she was killed, the Miami police, the Miami Beach police, I forget. I think she was in Miami Beach. They couldn't find any record of her. They could not find anybody who knew her. She just moved around a lot. So, it is the best we can do is the document that's in the district attorney's files. Okay, let's see here. How did Dr. Bailey manage to slip through the LAPD's net? Wouldn't a surgeon who had or had been residing 1 block from the dump site have attracted the attention of investigators? That is a great question. They never looked at him at the time. Why not? I don't know. They had a number of theories about the Black Dahlia case. One of them was that it was a veteran with PTSD reliving his wartime horrors. That was one possible scenario. Another one was, and this was their thinking. Okay, they knew Elizabeth Short, when she disappeared from the Biltmore, and she did, she only had the clothes on her back. Her luggage was at the bus station. All she had was what she was wearing, maybe $1 in her purse, and that was it. So how did she survive for a week without her stuff? And so that part of the assumption was right. But they decided, oh, well, maybe she was a lesbian. No. And then maybe she was killed in a lesbian love triangle. Okay. No, they really no. And I'm sorry, they really did, the cops in the 40s, they really did believe that. Or they really did look at that. Which is why in Jemison's memo, he talks about, queer woman surgeon, Yeah. Sorry for the language. That's what Jemison said in I think about 1950. So they did look at medical students, but they did not look at Bailey, and I don't know why they didn't. Let's see here. Are the last photographs of Elizabeth those taken at John Marshall High School? I think so. The photographs of Elizabeth Short at John Marshall High School, again, you see them plastered all over the internet. Those are from the district attorney's files. What happened was she had gotten asked to leave this apartment house. I'm blanking on it. She was living with a couple of guys named Marvin Margolis and Bill Robinson. And they said, okay, time for you to go. And she was living with Margie Graham. Margie Graham went back to Massachusetts, and Elizabeth Short was on her own. Well, she runs into this guy on Hollywood Boulevard named Glenn Stearns, I think was his name. Stearns, something like that. Anyway, he says, hey, you'd be a great model. Let's go. Let me go take you pose for some pictures. So she went up to John Marshall High School with him and posed those pictures. Those are from about October of 46. And that's it. And those are the last we know. And they are all over the place, which are, they're colorized and everything else. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. That's a James Richardson question. Oh, I read somewhere that Aggie Underwood might have known the identity of the killer. Any truth to this rumor? No. Nobody knew. No. And by the same token, the detectives, it isn't that, well, we knew who did it, we just can't get the evidence, we don't have it, we can't build a case against them. They never figured it out. Harry Hansen was confident that he never talked to the killer. So when people have their list of suspects, they treat it like a game of Clue, and it's like the killer has to be one of these people. It's like, no, not necessarily. So, no. Okay. Let's see here. Can you accept room for fiction that Elizabeth Short's story for a feature film? I have nothing to say about fictional, any fictional movie about Elizabeth Short, any fictional movie about the Black Dahlia case is going to be a snuff film. And that's all there is to it. You cannot Hollywood will never, ever make a movie about Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, that isn't a snuff film. They will. Which is why I have absolutely zero interest in participating in a movie. No. That's how Hollywood operates. It will be a snuff film. Absolutely. Guarantee it. I'm a few minutes over. Let me do one more written. I'm going to do one more written question and one more chat question. And then, I'm at the end of the, well, let me go back. I have this list of submitted questions. So let's see here. One more here. Okay. Could you tell us about your estimation of the legendary John St. John? Epic reputation, but was he really involved over the years with the Black Dahlia case? Did he pursue active leads? Okay. John St. John, the legendary, I think he was serial number 1, something like that. He was a caretaker. Okay. The lead detective in the Black Dahlia case, from the day he went to the crime scene to the day he retired, was Harry Hansen. Finest Brown. However I pronounce his name. If I say Finest, people will say Finnis. If I say Finnis, people will say Finest. It's the same thing with his brother. If I say Thad, people will say Tad. If I say Tad, people will say Thad. I don't know. Anyway, Harry Hansen was the lead detective. Finest Brown, or Phineas Brown, whatever, was his partner. And Hansen was the lead detective on that case from the day he went to the crime scene until he retired in the 60s. After that, it was handed over to a series of caretakers, custodians of the file, which is the status of it now. John St. John took phone calls. Hi, I think grandpa did it, something like that, and that's it. Did he enter? I think John Gilmore came up with this goofball theory about Jack Anderson Wilson, and the Herald Examiner, interviewed him, and you'll notice in Severed that John Gilmore only publishes the front part of the article because the back part of the article is everything undermines it. Okay. And at that point, the Herald Examiner was on its last legs. They would write articles about anything. And it's like, oh, the Black Dahlia, that's good for some ink. So, yeah. John St. John was a custodian. Danny Galindo was a custodian. I can't remember. There was a detective who had it for a while, and I don't remember his name. He preceded Brian Carr. Brian Carr was a custodian of the file. Now, Brian, for very complicated reasons, primarily due to Steve Hodel, did a lot more digging into the Black Dahlia file than most people. The result being that the current detective who has it, Mitzi Roberts, doesn't take questions. She won't talk about the Black Dahlia case either. Helen, see you later. And so Andre sent me this clip of Brian saying, well, and people have interpreted to say, well, the evidence is missing. Okay, no, the evidence isn't missing. He's talking about the envelopes. I can't find the envelopes. Well, yeah, the envelopes were the envelope that was used to mail her stuff. Okay, that was destroyed during testing. That's gone. That doesn't exist. So that's very different. And you got to remember, these detectives are very schooled. They're very skillful. They will tell you the truth, but they won't tell you anything they don't want you to know. He said, well, I looked for it and I couldn't find it. Where did he look? Did he look here? Did he look? You got to remember who you're dealing with. Okay. D. Kagan, did they look into Betty Bersiger's father-in-law, who was also a surgeon? Not as far as I know. Did they establish any connection between them? I don't think so. Okay. Let's see. I think that's it. We are at closing time. This has been a lot of fun, and I am going to say farewell for now. Now, remember, let me get my calendar here. Okay, July goes away. August goes away. The next one will be first Tuesday of the month, which is September 5. Okay. So, next Ask Me Anything, September 5, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and I will see you then. Right, Boxy? Boxy says see you then. Okay. Thanks a lot. See you next time. And this will be posted later. It'll be online if for people who couldn't make it. You can watch it again. Please subscribe. Thank you. Bye-bye. Okay.